All right, I'm going to continue on. It's going to seem like I'm backtracking a little, but I want to go over this entire product maintenance application that starts in here, and it takes up most of the rest of the chapter. I've also brought it up in Visual Studio, and I want to look at the files that are in there. So as we go through something in the book, I'm going to pop back and forth between what's in the book and the actual code itself. All right. Now, again, and I know this isn't anything new, but and I just want to make sure everybody understands what's going on here. What happens when you fill this out right here and you click save is it instantiates or creates a new product. All right. Now, they're not doing a heck of a lot in here. It looked like, at least. I don't think they're doing a lot of validation. Okay. The project that we're going to be working on probably more tomorrow than today, I did a bunch of validation in it. I put in a lot of the stuff that we have been doing. All right. And we're going to create it first as a console app and then recreate it as a GUI app. And you'll see that, again, that a lot of times that putting in the defensive coding takes up a lot of code. All right. Plus this whole idea of object-oriented programming. I've used this analogy before. I don't know if I have with you guys or not, but it's like mushrooms. People either typically love or hate mushrooms. Normally that's the case. There's not really a lot of middle ground. When I was a little kid, I couldn't stand them, and then for some reason, I started eating them, and now I like eating them. The point is that many people see object-oriented programming like that. I'm in the middle of reading an article right now. It's a couple years old, but it's called Object-Oriented Programming, the $1 Trillion Disaster. And they're using trillion because there's trillions of dollars worth of software that is out there that has been created utilizing object-oriented concepts. And they're very hard to explain. They're not that easy to demonstrate. All right. And a lot of people just are bewildered by them, for lack of better words. All right. So the idea is, again, we put in something in this we click the add product button. That's going to bring up the new product form. We fill that out. We click save. Boom. It's going to add it in here as a new product. Okay. We click the delete product button. It's going to check and it's going to say, is anything highlighted? If nothing's highlighted, it's going to do absolutely nothing. It's not going to give you an error message. It's just not going to do anything. All right. And if one is highlighted, it will come back and basically say, you're about to remove this. Do you want to remove it? So let's just quickly look at the program in action, so to speak. All right. So if we come in here and we run the program, there it is. Okay, I realize the interface isn't very big, but if I come in here and I click add product and I put in a code, and I'll just put ABC123 description, this is a test product, and let's put in $25. And you click save, and there it is. All right, nothing fantastic there, but notice if I click delete, again, no error, nothing. All right, but if I go on and click on the one that I just put in here and I click delete, now it says, are you sure you want to delete this as a test product? So it gives you the message and it also gives you the description. And as always, you can click no and it stays there, but if you click yes, it's gone. Now, there's something actually pretty important with this, and that is we're not working with a database right now. We're just throwing things into a list box and removing things from a list box. The reason I'm saying that, and the reason that that's not as important now, but it will be later, is with databases, every time you create a record, what happens is every record has what's called a primary key, which is a unique record identifier. And with us, we're going to have a field, typically in most tables, it's called ID. All right. Well, every time you remove a record, when you create a record, a new ID is created. When you remove a record, that ID is removed. Most of the time, you set your stuff up so that it automatically increments. All right. And so in other words, right now, I would have 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay. I just put one in and took it out. So 5 is gone forever. It's not like 5 comes back again. All right, so if I were to create another one with databases, it would be 6. And when you think about it, it's sort of at least reminiscent of the way life works, in that typically it depends on the size of the organization, but a lot of times in a big organization, if you get hired there, you become a number. All right, and as long as you're there, you're that number. And when you leave, for whatever reason, usually they don't give that number out again. All right, you might be put into some kind of a maintenance database or something like that, but they'll have information about you. And they do that to protect themselves, or if you want to come back and try to work there again later, or whatever. All right, so let's take a look. What's in here for the product is not new. All right, now I wanted to try something just to see if it would work, and I think it will. So let's take a look at this just from the start. So this is the product.cs file. So this is the product class. You saw this before. Private string code, private string description, private string price. Okay? So when we go down here, we're not doing anything special. Do you see this? How with all these we're just returning and setting? I don't see any reason why we couldn't go in here and do this and type in and say get set, and then do it again for the next one. I think it doesn't want anything at the end there. All right. And then do it here. All right, and the reason that we're able to do that, and the reason that it works okay, I'm going to fix that error in just a second. I don't have a semicolon there. So I think by doing this and putting it in like this, what we'll be able to do then is literally remove all of this. Now I could be wrong, but I'm going to grab all this here for all 3 of these. All right, and I'm going to comment it out. Okay. Now I'm going to save. First of all, did I get errors? If I got errors, then I shouldn't go on. Well, I get tons of errors. It says does not contain a definition for description. Okay. Well, I do need it because I'm using it inside of here. All right. So let's forget I just said that. Let's just go over the entire program from start to finish, and I'll get rid of this. What I wanted to get across to you is in the book, they talk about when you create these variables like this, you put them in lowercase CODE. But then when you use them down here, you make them uppercase. And I've always wondered, why do you have to do that? So I started looking at other things online. Some people do that, some people don't do it. And it tends to work just fine whether they make it uppercase, lowercase, or mix them like this. All right. But taking it from the top, what are we doing? You've seen this before. We've got 3 fields. All right. But we're doing absolutely nothing with them as far as validation. So we've got 2 strings and a decimal. So if we create an empty product, you already know this from yesterday, what that's going to do is it's going to literally come in there and it's going to create a product with a code that's the empty string with a description that's the empty string, and a price that's 0. Do you have to do that? The answer is no. We could come in here and do something like this. So we could come in here and say this dot code equals no code provided. All right, and I can do the same thing with this dot description equals no description provided. All right, and then finally, this dot price, it's going to default to 0 anyway, but I'll just put in here, this dot price equals 0.00 M. Now, did I do anything special? No, but you should be able to realize right away after I do this, if I go back and run the program again, and I say add product, and I put nothing in there, and I click save, it says code is a required field. Okay, so you do have to put something in there. Good. All right, so there's a little bit of stuff in there. So what do we have before? ABC 1, 2, 3. All right. And it says description is a required field. That's good. All right. So this is the description. And it says price is a required field. That's good. But I wanted to see something in here. What if I put in -4? Well, it put that in. So it's doing at least a sum, I should say. It's doing some validation in here, okay? Now I'm going to exit, so I don't really need this. It is fine what they did, setting it up like this, all right? Why? Because as we'll see later, it is doing some validation. Again, with this one, notice what it's doing, all right? It's taking whatever you provided for the code, and it's setting it equal to the code, all right? Now, let's try something, because I don't know if it's going to do this or not, if it'll take this. So right now, notice there is already something in there with C12. All right, so if we add a product, and if I put in C12, and I put it in there like that, it says price must be a decimal. Yeah, it should be, but 25. All right, so now, I guess it was CS12. So let me try it again. Add product, CS12. All right, now I've got 2 CS12s in there. That typically, depending on what you go and make for your primary key, once we get into databases, what we just did right there might be illegal in there. All right. If I decide, for example, that, yeah, I do want this code to be my, I could put what's called a unique identifier on there. That's typically what you would do. All right. Now, I don't know what those codes even mean for them, so maybe it's fine to have multiple codes. All right, but I think I didn't do this, and I'm not going to, but I think I could just replicate this one. So I could put in CS12, 5450, Muroc C# 2012 again, and it would take it just fine. That's not good. All right. That's why once we get to that point, we'll want to make sure we're doing more checking than what's being done right now. Plus, we'll want to make sure, as I already mentioned to you, we'll want to check and make sure that you can't put in a negative number. And you already saw that you could do that. All right. So it's pretty good the way it's set up, but it's not perfect. All right. So when you create a product, since it's made all 3 of these fields mandatory, this is the one that's basically going to end up getting called all the time, every time you create a new product. All right. And that's good. All right. Anytime we ask in our code, no pun intended, for the code, it's going to call this. If we were to come in and try to reset the code for one of the books, it's going to call this. And the same thing for description, and the same thing for value. All right, hopefully that's, or a description for price rather. All right, and then we've got our get display. So that's the only thing that's in here. All right. So when we take a look, so again, that's our product. The product DB, this isn't going to make a heck of a lot of sense until we get through the database stuff. But what it's telling us to do right here, is to basically create a new list of products. The rest of the stuff, I don't want to go through with you because it probably would confuse the heck out of you. But it's using XML, which is the extensible markup language. All right, what does that mean? Well, it's easier to show you what XML is. What that is right there, that's what you see when you first open up the program. That's the stuff that is populating that list box. All right. So you'll notice a code, a description, a price, a code, etc. So that is the stuff that's in there. And if I would have brought it up just a couple minutes ago, it probably would have had the new things that were in there also. All right. So there is validation being done in here, and it's being done right there. It's being done in this thing called validator. All right. And if you remember, we used that tag yesterday, and in that tag, we put in something like what? Code or description or price. We use that because we are running here a generic routine that is going to check to see whether or not the field that we put in is got anything in it or not. If it's empty like this, boom, it's going to say that that tag, so that you saw that for all three. This is the code that they're putting in here. All right. Now, it also has to come in. This is just saying, is it present or absent? But it must also come in and check for decimal for numbers. So as you'd guess, strings are much easier to handle in here. If you went in and you made yourself a class and it had just strings in it, there's not that much validation you have to do. In fact, if you're going to allow empty strings for certain fields, you don't have to do any validation for those fields. But in here, as it says, we're doing a try parse. Okay? If it works, we're going to return true. Otherwise, we're just going to bring up a message box. Okay? We're going to set the focus there, and we're going to return false. It's not even the way that this is set up. It's not even going to allow us to put in, as soon as we put in something wrong, it's not even going to take it. This stuff, they're not even going to talk about right here. This is the isInt32. We'll talk about that, as it says, in a later chapter. All right. So that's the validation that's done. Let's just keep walking our way through this. Okay. So this is, if we bring this up, let's see, where is it? There it is. So this is the main form. This is the form that comes up when you begin to go through the program. All right. Here's the code that goes with that. Again, you'll notice none of that's needed. All right. I'm not going to get rid of it, but none of it's needed. One thing that is in here is this. Anytime you've got systems.collections or systems.collections.generic, it means you're using a list. As I mentioned to you yesterday, you use a list so you can dynamically add and remove products. And there's no limit. We could remove everything that's in here, start all over again if we wanted to. We could add 100 new books or products in here if we wanted to. All right. Plus, there's no checking that's being done in here. You'll notice that everything that's in there right now, they're all books. All right. If we wanted to put in a basketball, we could do that. We just give it a code, give it a description, and give it a price. So we're not doing any kind of checking for that. We're not checking to make sure code falls within a certain range, that a price falls within a certain range, that, all we're checking for is the code is present, the description is present, the price is present, and the price is a number. That's all we're checking in here. All right. So as you walk your way through here, what does it say? This is creating our, right now, empty list of products. That's what that's doing. So typically when you go and you create this, something like this, a list like this is not a list box. This is literally a list. Kind of look at a list as being like an array, but whereas an array is a fixed size all the time, if I make an array of size 10, it can't get any bigger. I can only fill one component if I want, and then it's got 9 empty ones. But it can't change size while the program is running. If I want it to be able to change size, I use a list as opposed to an array. And you'll notice in here too, as we look through here, the class itself is public, but virtually every routine in here is private. And you say, yeah, you told us yesterday that isn't the case. Well, it's a way that you can write this. This means that these routines that are in here are only going to be able to be called from what's part of this program right here. So programs from the outside are not going to be able to call fill product list box. They're not going to be able to click the add button, etc. All right. So let's quickly just look through what's happening in here. So when the form is loaded into memory, we're calling this thing called get products. And what get products is basically doing is it's going through that XML file that I just showed you. All right. And it's grabbing all those. That's becoming the product DB. And then it's calling fill list box. What fill list box does is it makes sure that we're starting fresh, so it cleans it. And all it's doing then is it's going through every single line that's in that XML file, all right, and it's parsing it out, and it's adding every component into the list box. And it's using that get display text. Where the heck is that? That's in our product thing. That's this. And it's adding a separator. If we didn't add the separator, it would use a comma and a space between each field. But we're adding the separator, and the separator that we're adding in this case, the separator that we're adding is a tab. We could make it anything we wanted to. We could put some spaces in there and use a pipe sign or whatever we wanted. All right, so this is what happens then here when we call the add button. So notice it's going to bring up a new form. You note that happened right away. That came up on the screen. That's what this is doing. All right, then it's trying to come in here and create a new product based on that form. If product is not equal to null, so in other words, if you left it blank, there's not much you can do with it. All right, and that's all going to be handled. You already saw that. It's going to come in and it's going to check for those fields. But as long as it's not null, what is it doing? It's adding the product. All right, it's adding it to products, and it's telling it to save it, and it's telling it to repopulate the list box. So it should have the new entry that's in there. So in other words, this is a real-time application. As you go in and add a new product, and you click the Add Product button, if it meets all the criteria, boom, it's immediately added to the list box. The way that we'll change this in the future is we'll immediately add this, but we'll add it to a database. All right? And here's the delete. Now, can somebody tell me? We talked a little bit about this yesterday. What does that line mean? I know it means if I is not equal to -1, but what does the -1 mean? Anybody take a guess?
You haven't selected it.
Yes. If it's -1, there's no selected index. And as I told you before, it means that you've clicked the delete button, but you haven't selected a product to delete. So it says if it's not equal to -1, do this. And you'll notice there's no else. So if it is equal to -1, you don't do anything. All right? So if there is no selected index, it's just going to return. That's good. That's what we'd want to have happen. All right. Now, one thing I want you to realize, and you're going to see this even more tomorrow, anytime you're using an array, which is what we're doing right here, and you use these brackets, what goes in there is a number. It's either a literal number or it's a variable that represents a number. All right? And it has to be something that breaks down to an integer because you're specifying a location in an array. Typically, when you create an array, one of the reasons, again, you can't change the size is what the computer attempts to do is it attempts to store the array in memory, in contiguous memory locations. So if you create an array of size 6, it gives you 6 memory locations right after the other. All right? And like in JavaScript, for example, you can change the size of an array while the program's running. But you have no guarantee once you've created that original array with 6 things, if you add another one, that it's going to be in the next location right after 6. You can't guarantee that. All right? But in this language, basically arrays are finite as far as their size. Once you create them, you set them and forget them type of thing. All right. So it says, are you sure you want to delete? And it just gives us the product deletion. This is very similar to what we do with our exit button. All right. It's bringing up the dialog that says, that message, are you sure you want to delete? Whatever. And the title is confirm delete. There's a yes and a no. If you press delete, notice what it does. It calls products.remove, and we're going to look at that in just a minute. Then it resaves it, and it refills the list box. So again, in real time, you're able to either A, add, or B, delete a product. All right? The exit, they didn't do what we do. They're just doing a this.close, which is fine. All right. So then for our new product, the one that's right here, here's the code for that. There's not a lot in there. So what's it doing? Well, it's saying we're going to create a brand new product and we're going to set it equal to null. All right. Then we're calling get product. What is that doing? It's calling the dialog, all right, this dot show dialog, and it's going to return a product. That's not even that important, okay? What this is doing in here is what is important. This is the save. So notice in here, if is valid data. Well, there's is valid data. And notice it's going to return this and this and this and this. So what is it doing? It is going through field by field, and if this is not present, or this is not present, or this, if any combination of those one or more fields are not present, it's going to return false. And if you assume that every field is present, but the price field is not a decimal value, it will again return false. But if there's something in here, and there's something in here, and there's something in here that is a decimal value, it'll return true. All right? So if it is valid, meaning it returned true, what are we doing? We're instantiating right there a new product based on the things that we put into the text box. The three fields are the three text box fields. All right? And we're done there, so we call close. And that's going to close that new product form. All right? And when we cancel, we just close. We don't do anything. All right? So, I mean, maybe that was a waste of your time, and I'm not trying to do that. But the idea is you've got to be able to walk through it and see what's happening at each stage in here. All right? Because they do explain it in the book, and they do a pretty good job. But to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense to do that unless you've got the code up and you're looking at the code as you're going through the explanation. All right? So again, those were those three property tag settings. We talked about that already. So in this text box, it's code. In that text box, it's description. In that text box, it's price. As mentioned, that is saying that when we have our generic error, all right, when we have our generic error, we're able to write one routine. Did we have to do it that way? No. We could have written three different routines and not used tag. That's kind of the way we've been doing it thus far this semester. All right. So as it says, it retrieves product information from a file, that XML file. It displays it in the list box and allows you to add or delete. Then as mentioned, to add, you click the Add Product button, and it displays or instantiates a new product form, which allows you to enter a new product, enter in the three pieces of information, and click the Save button. It says, alternatively, if you change your mind, you can click the Cancel button. All right. In either case, as it says, you should be returned to the product maintenance form. So in other words, if I come in here and I run this and I ask for a new product and I change my mind, that's what happens. That's the this.close. All right. In the same way, if I click delete product, and I change my mind, okay, now basically I am in here until I do something. All right, so I could click it like this, but I could have put a cancel in there too, instead of a yes, no. There's a lot of different ways that this stuff can be done. All right. So as it says, the tag properties are set so the validator class can display a meaningful error message. That's true, but even more than that, the tags are set so that you're able to write one generic error handling routine for the stuff. All right, so they go through next, they go through the classes that are in here. And again, we've looked at the product class already. I'm not going to run through that. All right. If you do want more, for example, on the isInt32 and the isDecimal, what is it doing? It's making sure that what you put in there was a Boolean. All right. Now, they're not checking in there to see if it's signed or not. So technically, if you're checking for, and in here, they're not either. That's why I was able to put those negative numbers in. All right. Now, there's an is within range, as it says here, a static method that returns a Boolean value that indicates whether or not the specified text box is within range. But I don't think they're using that right now. All right. So some of the code that's in here, as they mentioned, refers to the product DB class. But they're not going to go through that until we get into the database stuff. They're going to come back to this application when we get into the database portion of the class. All right? So again, they go through this. I'm not going to go through it again because I just did. But hopefully, when you do this, you've got an idea of what it's like. All right? But to me, you know, and I've used this analogy before, I think that as you're learning how to swim, we should take you and put you in a kiddie pool to get you used to the water. I'm not trying to talk down to anybody, but this is not that it's real complex, but it's also not that easy what they're doing in here. All right? So we're going to go through an example in just a little bit, probably after the break. And when we do, the stuff that's in there might seem unbelievably simplistic to you. That's fine. It'll get harder. Take my word for it. All right. So this is, again, the code for the new product form. We went through all of that. All right. There's the stuff for the validator class. We went through all of that. All right. As it says, the code for the is in 32 and the is within range aren't shown here because they're not used here. That when we get into chapter 21, it will be used. All right. All right. So there's more skills for creating a class. Some of this you've already seen. All right, but let's take a look at it anyway. It says if you look back on the code property in figure 12.7, you'll see that the set and get simply returned, okay, those values. When that's the case, you can use an auto-implemented property. It's what we see right here. We've already talked about these. All right. And notice the way they're doing it, I think that this would have worked with what I showed you before, and that's probably where I screwed it up. So in other words, if I come back to here, I'm going to go back to the product class. All right. And what I'm going to do is this. I do this kind of stuff a lot. I'm going to copy the entire thing. I'm going to come down to the bottom, and I'm going to paste it in all over again. Why am I doing that? Because I'm going to take that whole thing just in case I screw it up. I'm going to take it and highlight all of it, and I'm going to comment it out. So if I do screw something up, okay, we should still be set. I can always go back to it, in other words. All right. In fact, that said, oh, no, I grabbed the wrong one. So let me just uncomment all that stuff. There. All right. This is what the one I wanted to do as the product. So what I want to do is I want to grab everything that I've got in my product class, everything. All right, up through right there, copy it to the clipboard, then down underneath this, I'm just going to throw it in here. All right. So I've got a copy. But what I'm trying to show you is I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe we can now get rid of this and this and this, all that stuff, like I tried to do before, but let's see if we can do it correctly now. Now I'll get errors right there, but I think if I make this a capital C, if I make this a capital D, and if I make this a capital P, all right, now notice there's no errors. Let's see if I broke anything. All right, I'm looking in here. Do I have any errors? It says product description is inaccessible. Okay, well, what does that mean? That means that anywhere in here that I'm using this, and I've got the lowercase, I'm going to have to change it to the uppercase. Now, did that get rid of all my errors? All right, still one there. So it says product description is inaccessible due to its protection level. All right. It says, are you sure you want to delete product.description? All right. And not sure if even with that one, what I'm going to do for right now, okay, is I'm just going to comment that out. I just want to see if the program itself is going to run. That's all. So there might be other things that I have to do in here. But again, what I'm concerned with is not the delete button. Okay, I just took out all the delete buttons code. But can I come in here and do this? Oh, it's giving me other errors. So there's a cascading effect. Changing it in one place, all right, is going to necessitate me changing it in other places. I'm not going to run through that. All I'm trying to get across to you is I believe we could have gone back and rewritten it so it looked like this. That's all. All right. So what's the advantage? Well, brevity, right? Okay. You'll see it in there both ways, is what I'm trying to tell you. Okay. All right. Now, it says there, when you use an auto-implemented property, which is that get set thing, you should know that the compiler generates or creates a private instance for you. Because of that, it's only accessible through the set and the get accessors. All right, you should also know that you can create a read-only property by omitting, etc. Okay, so if we look at the examples here, if I can use that, I want to use that because it's less code. All right. And we're going to take a look at all that stuff in more depth really tomorrow than today. Now, when you set it up, if you put a get accessor in there, you can do this. This is fairly new because you are doing a get, but what you're saying is, I want it to have an initial value. That doesn't mean you can't use a set later and change the value, but it says if you ask for the get and you haven't changed it, that's the value you're going to go get back. And again, I mentioned this to you yesterday. They show you here, all right, this is a setter, this is a getter. What's the difference between these? It's what side of the equal sign they're on. So again, if it's on the left-hand side of the equal sign, you're setting something. If it's on the right-hand side of the equal sign, you're getting something and typically copying it into a local variable. All right, and that's pretty much what they're saying in here. Now, it gets harder. Sorry, but it gets harder. And what's happened over time is they, meaning the people who create this language, have tried to come up with ways that are even easier. You may not look at this and say that it's easier, but once you get some experience in it, it's easier. All right, and it also allows me the chance to introduce what are called Lambda expressions, Lambda. And most programming languages provide a Lambda expression. Again, it's a shortcut, and we're going to look at it in just a minute. So what they're saying here is, if we did this, okay, now notice in this case with this get, this is the discount amount. This is actually something that's being calculated right there. You see that? All right. That's not just a return. So it probably would depend on, maybe what kind of a customer you were, how much you bought, or whatever. As you probably guess, if I go into Walmart and buy some cereal and it costs me $5, it sure as hell didn't cost Walmart $5. Why? Because they buy it in mass, right? All right, so they get it a lot cheaper. So what I'm telling you is this is something we'd be creating on the fly. The other thing I want to tell you is, yes, you can do it like this. You can also do it like this. This is the Lambda operator in virtually every language. It's an equals sign followed by a greater than sign. For those of you who next semester will hopefully be in the AWD1100 class, the third semester class, when we're working with Node.js, you'll see lambdas again. For those of you who will be in the other class, the AWD1000 class in fall, we will talk about them probably in the last week of class, so you'll have an idea of how they're used with Node.js. All right. So all they try to show in here is, again, they're showing you 3 different ways of doing this. Now, when you're writing the code, which one do you use? You use the one that makes the most sense to you. I believe the reason that they're showing you this is all 3 of these ways of doing things are used in actual applications. It's not that you only have to use any one of the 3. You can use any combination thereof. And they want to make sure that if you see it, you literally understand that this with the lambda is the same thing as this without a lambda. All right? But in here, what are they doing? They're literally setting the function itself equal to this. Now, you guys may remember this from last semester. one of the reasons that, or ways that JavaScript is a little bit different, is in JavaScript, a function is just a variable. So you can assign a value to it. That's what we're doing right here. We're running this function, and we're assigning the result of this function, all right, really of the message box, to this function. All right. Is there any advantage of doing it this way as opposed to this way? There's no brevity right here. They're both going to work, and you'll see both of them out in the actual application field. All right, so as it says there, if a property is read-only and all it does is it returns a value, you can use what they call an expression-bodied property. And you can code it using, again, that Lambda operator. That you will learn more about the Lambda operator with indexers, operators, and Lambda expressions in the next chapter. I will tell you, this is my opinion. I could be wrong. But to me, the next chapter in this book is the hardest chapter in the book. That's why we're going to go over it, not today, but that's why we're going to go over it, but we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, and we're going to basically say, oh, this is all important stuff, but it would be much more important if you were an advanced programmer that had been doing this stuff for a while. Because again, what they're trying to do with a lot of it is make your life easier. That's all. All right, next thing they talk about are code stubs, and you're going to see this today. Let's take a look right here. So if you do this right here, if you do something like this, if you type in product equal new product, okay, and you don't have a product that you've created yet, guess what? You're going to get an error message. That makes sense? But if you get an error message and you place your cursor over one of these things that are in red, you're going to get a bunch of possibilities. They'll be different depending on the type of class or exactly what it is you're doing. But if you choose the first one that they're showing right there, that's what's going to happen. It's going to literally add a product.cs or a product class. There won't be anything in it yet, all right? But the program won't break now, okay? So yeah, you can instantiate a product. It sure isn't going to do much because there's nothing in there to use. All right. As it says, you're using then what's called live code analysis to generate a class. Not only can you do that to generate a class, but you can do it to generate methods. And maybe you've seen this before. If you misspell a method and you put your mouse over it and you use this live analysis help, it'll basically say you don't have anything by that name. Do you want to create it right now? And if you do, it typically will create it, and look what it puts in here. It throws an error message that says not implemented exception, which means that you've got something with no code inside of it. Typically, the first thing you're going to do when that happens is you're going to remove that line of code. All right. So as it says in here, it's known as the generate from usage feature. You can read the stuff there yourselves. I don't want to sit and read to you. All right. All right. It says how to browse, diagram, and display and edit classes. Well, sometimes when you're going through and you're looking through a class, you might not have any idea what it does. You know, maybe it was something that was given to you. Maybe you're grabbing somebody else's code. I don't know. So as it says in here, the easiest way to browse classes in Visual 2015 and beyond is to use the Solution Explorer. So let's take a look in here. So here is the products, where is it? The product.cs class, okay? And I open it up, and can you see this? I know it's a little hard because it's not big text, but it's showing you what's in here. And I didn't do anything special to do that. I just opened up under product CS, I opened up product, and there's what it was. So it's showing me that it's got 3 members. It's got a string for code, a string for description, and a string for price. It's got 2 constructors, and it's got 2 get display text methods. It's just, that's a nice little way that if you're going through and you're like, why isn't this working? You might find out that there's some kind of a method you should have implemented and you're not, or there's some kind of a member you should have implemented and you're not. All right. It says another way to browse the classes is to use the class view window, which is displayed in the same group of windows as the Solution Explorer. It says the top pane of this window displays the classes for the project, and the bottom pane rather displays the members in each one. Let's see if we can find that. All right. So if you take your mouse and you put it up here, I'm looking switch views, sync, refresh, collapse all, show all files. I know it's in here someplace, but I don't remember where. Let me go back again. All right. It's displayed in the same group of windows as the Solution Explorer. Well, there's another way we could try to look for it, because you know that if you go here and you go through View, there is the Solution Explorer is in here. There's Class View right there. Can you see this? If I click, there it is. And again, you can see how it breaks down. All right. Now, it also opened up a new tab down here. This is Class View. Okay. And if I go back, I can go back up and bring up my Solution Explorer and I'm back where I was. Okay. All right. They come in here and they talk about the this lens feature where you could take your mouse and put it over stuff here and you can get it in here. But I know in 2015 and in 2017, it wasn't available in the community edition because we're using the free edition and they want you to upgrade and pay for it. I have never tried this in 2019. All right, but my guess is it's not going to work in there either because it hasn't worked in the earlier versions. All right. All right. Then the next thing they talk about in here is, as it says, how to use class diagrams and the class details window. So when you look right here, this is a class diagram. And it says this is the class diagram that shows two of the classes that are used in the project. Sometimes when you look at this stuff, it's a little more helpful to be able to see it like this. All right. And in fact, when we go in and we start working with databases, you're going to see a view that looks very much like this. What's nice is you can see kind of what links up with what. All right, you can see the members that are in here, etc. All right, so what does it say? It's a visual representation of the methods, properties, fields, etc. It says to select a class in a diagram, click on its border or its heading to expand or collapse it. I don't care. It says the details are shown in the class details window. To jump to the code for a member, you can go back and forth by just clicking on it. All right. And I don't remember how to bring it up in here, but it says here, you can go a view class diagram. So probably it'll be just like we just looked at in here. View. I'm looking for it, didn't see it, but again, you can bring that up as well. I don't use that. All right. Try to take a look for it during the break. All right, there's also something, as it says there, that's called the peak definition window. So if you're working in one class and you want to be able to see what effect that making changes could potentially have in another class, peak is, in some ways, typically peak is like a look ahead. All right, for example, when you are working with files, you never want to read past the end of the file because it's a good way to make a program crash. So what you oftentimes do is if you're reading through a file in a program is you use the peek method, because what peek does is it attempts to read the next record and it'll keep reading as long as there are records. And if there's a record, it'll return, yes, true, there's a record. If there's not, it'll return false, which means you've reached the end of the file. So you can keep yourself from getting one of those end of file errors. All right. So it says you can use it to display and edit the code for a member in another class. While you're in one class, you can basically use it on another one. To display it, as it says, right-click on a member and display peek from the shortcut menu. I don't know if we can do that or not, but notice that I'm in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I'm inside of, close a couple of these things here. All right, so I'm in products. No. There I am. I'm in products. Right mouse click. Peak definition. There you go. So if I wanted to see, for example, where that was defined. So you can highlight basically, I think, anything in here and kind of check and see what the effect on it would be. And then just close it when you're done. All right, believe it or not, we're just about done, thank goodness, with this chapter. The last 4 or 5 pages, so give me 5 or 10 more minutes and we'll take a break. The last 4 or 5 pages in here talk about structures. Look at the first sentence that's in here. A structure is similar to a class, but it defines a value type rather than a reference type. What does that mean? That means that a structure, basically, if you pass structures in, you're passing in copies. All right. When you pass objects in, you're passing in addresses, so it's the real thing. Typically, anything you can do with a class, you can do with a structure. And it says structures require less memory, they instantiate faster, and you should use them if you're working on programs that have a small amount of data. Well, you could argue and say, well, this program that we've been looking at has 3 pieces of data. That's pretty small. Could we have done all this with structures? The answer is yes. All right. So they show you here how to create a structure. Notice it's not public class, it's public struct. So when you look at this, if you look at the structure they've created right here, it looks virtually identical to the class that they did earlier. The only difference is, rather than saying public class, it says public struct. All right. So it says a structure can contain the same type of members as a class. It cannot include an empty constructor because the compiler always generates one. So even if you make your own, so even if you overwrite, like they did here, you'll notice there is a constructor, but there's no parameterless constructor. So even if you create your own, like they've done here, all right, the system will still create a parameterless one for you. You can't do that yourself. All right. So they go through on how to use it next. As it says, to start with, you declare a variable of a structure type like you would any other type of variable. When you declare it, an instance of that structure is created, but values are not assigned to the instance variable. So again, it looks very similar to the way that we have done things with a class. All right. Notice they've got product P and it's still P dot something. That looks pretty much the same way. All right. Now, here's a key thing. Unlike classes, structures cannot be inherited by other classes. Okay? We're going to be working for the next week or two on most of the material in chapters 12 and a little bit of what's in 13. And then when we get to 14, okay, and you'll start to see it a little bit after the break today, but when we get to 14, we're going to talk about inheritance. And it's a really important topic. Because what you typically do, let's assume that, I've used this example before, but let's assume that we work for a company and the company has 4 different types of employees. All right? They've got salaried employees, they've got commission employees, they've got pieceworker employees, and they've got hourly employees. Well, all 4 of those types of employees will have things in common. They could all have, for example, they could all have a first name, a last name, maybe an employee number, and I don't know, maybe just leave it at that. So we could create a real simple class that just held that stuff. Then we could create 4 other classes that inherit from that class. So those classes would automatically have a first name, a last name, and employee number available to them. But I wouldn't have to be rewriting the code with all of them. And the reason I'm telling you that is twofold. First, we're going to talk a little bit about that after the break. And second of all, you can't do that when you're using structures. All right? So that is, like they said, that is the big difference between them. So that's it. So I love the way this chapter ends. At this point, you may be wondering, why should you go to the extra effort of even doing this? All right, I mean, it seems like a lot of work. It seems like what we've been doing so far, we've done just fine without object-oriented stuff. I would argue that you've been using object-oriented stuff all semester, but still, I would understand that, and it's a really good argument you could make. All right, but it says there the answer is twofold. It says, first, dividing the code into classes makes it easier to code in 2 or more applications. What we will do tomorrow when we start on this class, this thing I made, it's a simple little bookstore that's going to allow us to add books into the inventory and then buy them. So it's going to be kind of all different things in a bookstore. All right. But when we create it, we're going to create something new. In fact, if you look in here, if you look on the screen, if I right mouse click on here and I choose add and I go to new item, all right, what you'll notice is there's nothing special. Most of the stuff that's in here we've talked about. I mean, it's text file and HTML file. This is all stuff if we were doing web stuff, and we're not. If we wanted to create our own XML file, we could do that. A schema is just how the XML is laid out, and the XSLT is how it's translated, for lack of better words. All right, that's an image file. There's that code analysis thing that we just looked at. So if you wanted to make your own rule set and tell it exactly what to do, etc. But if I come in here and I right mouse click on my solution, and instead of choosing add, like we've been doing, I don't want to come in here and add a new item. If I add a new project, this is what we're going to do tomorrow. Notice in here that when you start running through this, there's different kinds of projects. And there's one that is basically going to allow us to make a class library. Who cares? You should. Because what we're going to do tomorrow is we're going to make a class library. We're going to put a book class in it and a bookstore class in it. Why? Well, we'll be able to use it by adding just a using statement inside of our console app. So, well then, we're going to take that same app and make it a GUI app, and we'll be able to use the same classes because we put them in a library. All right? It's just like saying a regular library that you have with books in it. I can take out stuff, so can Gabriel take out stuff. All right? So stuff is able to be shared. And that's what we're going to be getting into starting tomorrow. All right? It is